Another one says Ache. Okay. I didn't warn you that I was going to be very poetic, but that is how I decided to do it. Normally, when we talk about African music, we're talking about a process. We're talking about an event which one person cannot really do. Okay, so the topic for today, one will ask, what is African music? And the answer is so simple. For me, it's a massive generalization. Why do we delude ourselves to think that Africans together do something called a single music or a genre? So this is a critical question. When you're sitting down here listening to me, you should be asking that question. I agree with you. But again, I can argue. Just as Molefi Asante also argued that if we can talk about European culture, Asian culture, American culture, then of course we can talk about African culture. So in that argument, I can say, well, I can talk about African music. But it doesn't really solve that problem. It's still problematic because thinking that the whole continent dances or makes music in a single style is a delusion. But I would have to say immediately that there are commonalities that we share. And then we can leverage on those commonalities and then say confidently that this one is from a certain part of Africa. It's the reason why I am going to try and do justice to this. It's a very generalized topic that I chose, but I know for sure my narrative will give you some idea of what I am talking about. So I'll be talking about key definitions will guide you. They are the tools I'm going to give you to be able to follow me. And then we talk about Africa and the issue of generalization. You have to understand the English, music in an African context. And then we talk about categories to be included into integration packages that exist for immigrants, particularly refugees. Then we talk about my experience in the diaspora, which is the powerhouse or the core of what I'm going to be sharing with you. And then finally, we will address the issue of representation. And I propose collaboration, continuous collaboration as a solution to those problems, and we'll see how those things play out. So let's see what is there. Now, there are 3 points over there. Let me just read something. Research by Favel to 2022, Hinga and Schweizer 2020, and Kampori and Ambrunisi 2020. They have extensively documented the challenges associated with the process of integrating ethnic minority groups into mainstream society here in the diaspora. Among the key issues raised are the political dynamics and structural barriers that shape and often constrain integration efforts. Policies are frequently designed with explicit intention of preventing the misuse of the social welfare system. And as a result, the integration process becomes primarily driven by governmental regulations rather than cultural or social considerations. For African immigrants, particularly the refugees, this process of integration can often lead to a clear sense of cultural alienation. These individuals who have been displaced from their native cultural values would have to sacrifice their cultural values and to adopt the values of their new environment. And I believe strongly that that will actually alienate them from the cultural values that define them as Africans. The first photo is Kwabena Nketia of Ghana, who was one of the pioneers of African music. He died a few years ago at the age of 98. In the middle is Daniel Avobodo, who is very active today. And I put them into 3 groups. So we can call the first one our grandmasters. And then the second one will say our masters. And the third one, I will say my colleagues. So I am expressing my gratitude to them because some of them are still actively working in the diaspora. What are they doing? They are transmitting African music, Ghanaian music, West African music, and specifically some specific musical forms that are relevant to what they are doing. So let's move on. My definition is actually drawing on all those 3 categories of people that I have shown you already. And I'm looking at it as an integration of sound, rhythm, movement, and visual forms as a repository of cultural knowledge, values, and virtues. This tells us that music in African communities are not primarily created for entertainment. The primary purpose was for them to become a repository, to become a storehouse, to become a historical archive, to become a computer for us to store knowledge and experience. And as you can see, the definition is not limited to only one activity. I'm interested in the 54, the number 54. It's a big lie. Because Africa has more countries than 54. Why 54? And the consolation they give us is the adjective recognized. So the question is, who has the power to recognize Ghana and not recognize Togo? This is why the political dynamics began long ago. Even the partition of Africa was not endorsed by the people. It was an imposition. Otherwise, I don't know, I may be speaking a different language today, but today I speak English. I am not from England, I'm from Ghana, where there are more than 89 local languages. But I am speaking English, and I teach English as though it was my mother tongue. Okay, now, let's look at Ghana. I'm just trying to clear that ambiguity around the concept of African music. So we are dropping from a continental level to a national level. So let's go down. The next one, we might find Ghana there. Look, the location is in West Africa. The land area is 92,100 square miles. Population is a little over 32 million people. All the four elements that are mentioned over there, in my language, they are Zu, B, Ga, and Abra. The sound, rhythm, vibration, and movement. So that song is saying that vibration at any union with sound creates rhythm, which becomes the controller of everything. Therefore, everything that actually moves, or any locomotive engine moves on rhythm, if you have a Ford Escape as your car, you should know the sound of the engine. If it is a petrol engine, you know the sound of it. The day you make a mistake and put diesel in there, it will disturb the rhythm of that engine. Perhaps it will so that's what it is. And it is written in their memory, in their identity, everything. And one thing I know about my people is that they follow principles and mechanisms of life because they realize that the whole life is regulated by music. Now, let's take it from sound. You have instrumentation, songs, rhythm, and vibration over there. Now, come down here, kinesthetic senses, including balance, internal feelings, and spirituality. And I will demonstrate that in a dance movement, you will see. Then come here, costumes. Even the costumes that we put on, they are visual representations of concepts that we carry, whether in our spiritual spaces or in our own cultural space. Then you go to movement and gestures. Every living being must move. Locomotion is a key element of a living being. Now, again, science is what is happening in all of these things that we are calling music. And later, I'll come to that later on, but let me just drop it quickly. You see all these things. The shell is from a tree, or let's say plants. And this is from animals. So when I was in primary school, I was taught the science. It says living things and non-living things. Under the living things, we had two categories, plants and animals. And so when I started playing drums, I realized that all the plants and animals are here. That's how I love science so much that even today, I see myself as a scientist. And at the point, I produce my own definition of science. What is that? I said science is the discovery of law and order of things. If you are a pianist, you are a scientist. Once you are able to discover the law and order of how this thing works, you are a scientist of it. The projector we have over here has a law and order on which it runs. And if you do not discover the laws and order of how it runs, you can never operate it. So that's what it is in simple terms. Now, looking at all these things, I have actually put together all the underlying principles and mechanisms that you can see within that phenomenon that we are calling music in Africa. So when we talk about music in Africa, it goes beyond sonic exploration, and it extends to what? Movement, language, symbolism, philosophy, religion, cosmology, cosmogony, science, technology, customs, and institutions. The list is endless. And I dare say it's everything. Everything. It's music. Jumbe gaye nyakosuba jumbe. Jumbe gaye nyakosuba jumbe. Ablame jeba gaye nyakosu jumbe. Gaye nyakosuba jumbe.
Now, all the four elements that I mentioned over there, in my language, they are Zu, B, Ga, and Afla. The sound, rhythm, vibration, and movement. So that song is saying that vibration attaining union with sound creates rhythm, which becomes the controller of everything. Therefore, every living being actually moves on rhythm. Every living thing moves on rhythm. Everything that actually moves, or any locomotive engine moves on rhythm. If you have a Ford Escape as your car, you should know the sound of the engine. If it is a petrol engine, you know the sound of it. The day you make a mistake and put diesel in there, it will disturb the rhythm of that engine. So that's what it is. And it is written in their memory, in their identity, everything. And one thing I know about my people is that they follow principles and mechanisms of life because they realize that the whole life is regulated by music. Let's move on, please. So we can see some photos over there in the community. We don't need a community center. We don't need a room like this. The weather is so favorable. You just have to find some under some trees and the fresh breeze there. So as I sing, somebody will follow. And then, so I'm going to ask my big brother here to join me. Let's do some music for people to see. We're going to play some Agbaza music. And the talking is done too much. So let's do something. There's something that you can see here. Music as a holistic art form, it goes beyond entertainment. I said that over and over and over. It serves as a cultural and spiritual vessel. Yeah. There are different segments of African life, and each of them is controlled by music. Now, it fosters a sense of identity, reunion. So if you had left something that was part of you initially, and you realize that you're gonna have to go pick it and then reunite with that. And that sense of belongingness and identity is also there. And I'm arguing that you can reconnect refugees to their native title of use. Oh, very good. Say, oh, oh. You don't have to sing it. Today is your day. I am going to perform for you. Say, oh, oh. And you, Namakua Bazabuala Dimhe, Namakua Bazabuala Dimhe. It's a song that I just sang, and very soon my friend is going to help me will play. Ideally, there should be 3 drummers here, but I'll do the magic to play all the 3. And that's another level you get to as a master drummer. Yeah. Then, of course, the song says, look, I am very much aware and I accept that in this world, whatever comes to me, whether it's fortune or misfortune, I accept. But I know for sure that when I die, the music and dance tradition will surely bury me. That's all you are interested in. That is why we don't really buy funeral insurance that when you are dead, somebody will get the money and bury you. No. The insurance you contribute is for you to participate in the tradition in your lifetime. And that registers in everybody's mind that look, when we die, we must all come there and do it for you. Who do you some bazaar and anybody who feels like dancing to it, you can come and dance to me. Who do you? It was the first thing I got to learn as a kid. So at the age of 60, I was pronounced a master drummer. But these are people who have started learning this and they've been able to perform this with me. I'm so grateful. Thank you very much. Now, the song I sang, we will see it there. So sometimes you see drums on people's head and musicians are playing them. See, there are times that some people who we have high hopes that they should be master drummers, they fail. When they fail to get there in time, then they are made to carry drums. Their belief is that when you carry the drum, someone is playing, the rhythm will enter your background. See that? It happens during procession. And all these things. You know, and you see what is happening over there? They're pouring libation before they begin. Just as I did, I call the spirit of music, I call the great composers and performers, and to bring the spirit of music down. Now, there's something that we need to understand today, that the holistic aspect or the holistic nature of music in Africa makes it difficult for us to have a single word that translates to music within the European framework. So, in Ghana, when I ask people that, do you have any word that means music? They say yes. I say, give me the word. And when they give me the word, it simply means song. But within our framework, song will be just a small fraction of what we call music. So you cannot say that. The Akan will say, oh, nyum. Then I ask them again, so how would you call song? They say, it's also nyum. I say, music and song are not the same. One is an umbrella, the other one is a direct. Then the Ga person will say, oh, it's lala. Lala is song, but it can never be the bigger one. In my own language, somebody will say ha. Ha will never take you there. It has to be something else. So we use the term vu. Interestingly, vu simply means the music and the dance, and also is the same word that is for the drum. So that is somehow accepted, but it's not fully accepted because there's libation poured over there, or prayer, and other things are supposed to be part of that. It's a whole event. It's a process that has a beginning, it has various stages, you know. Now, it integrates all of these things. And again, we use that as a medium for criticism and praise. If you have a local assemblyman who is not doing his work, just time him or her. Now, two people are very powerful in this. Number one is the song leader, Heno. Everyone say Heno. Heno. Very good. Heno is the song leader. And then the second person is the Azagunoga, the master drummer. Say Azaguno. Very good. So, this is a community thing. Nobody stands there and become audience. We all have to participate.
Even if it is your MP who is not really responding to your developmental issues, the day he gets into the arena to dance, that is the day for you to criticize him. And the powerful man who is the Heno, the song leader, will have to sing a song that speaks about that person. And when he gets in there, he hears all of that, and he will have to change. Because if he doesn't change, the next time he will meet the worst.
All right, so having explained what constitutes music within the varied African traditions, I'm now going to move to explain what I mean by music as a vehicle for delivering effective integration of African immigrants in the diaspora. But first of all, we have to understand a phenomenon called global human migration. In the 21st century, we've seen a high rise of constant human movement and interaction of cultures. And drawing on my own previous work, I now can confidently say that there are a number of factors that actually account for the high level of human movements, which include migration for further studies, or what you can also call educational migration. Then we also have economic migration, we have religious migration, and then all of these equally account for a high level of movement of people. And it is important that when these people leave their original African communities into the diaspora, they are properly integrated into their host, which is a mainstream society. And as we already learned from the beginning of the presentation, that the host societies normally rely on governmental policies, governmental documents that are significantly looking at protecting the abuse of the welfare system. The policies do not capture anything that has sociocultural background of these immigrants, particularly the refugees. And so I am proposing, or within the broader context of integrating immigrants from the African continent, should consider the sociocultural background of the immigrants, particularly the immigrants that are labeled as refugees. So although slavery stands as one of the most harrowing and coercive forms of migration, economic, religious, education, and family ties are also accountable, as I explained earlier on, because war and other natural calamities are the umbrella under which refugees are, relocated. Sometimes we don't really see the intrinsic elements and the trend. And so we always consider physical waging of war on human beings as those natural calamities. But there are other instances where people flee their own countries not because there is a physical war. Sometimes there is a mental war, there is emotional war, there is economic war, and there is political war too. For example, when you live in a country that is not governed properly, and for that matter, the economic hardship rises, people can flee. It's also a war. Sometimes when you leave a country to another because your skills are not properly appreciated and paid for, you are also fleeing a war. That's an economic war. You flee. So you see, the interesting thing is that
when you flee that war, which is not a physical war, you are not recognized as a refugee. And this is what I'm trying to draw our attention to. Now, if you listen to Nelson Mandela here, he says when you see that the government and their relatives are looting the country, you have to disobey, rise up, get on the streets, and drive them out of the country, send them into exile. Now, Nelson Mandela is talking here about positive defiance. You defy a situation positively, you know, so that shows clearly that it's a war. Dictators, economic mismanagers are waging war on you. So you defy those kind of dictatorship. And there are two things. When you defy them and you are successful, you are rather going to push them into exile. But if you're unable to sack them from the country, then you have to leave. And when you leave, you become a refugee. So these are some of the complexities. And I would like to move on now and talk about music, migration, and my experience. And what is important here is to know that as human beings migrate, music also migrates through migrating artists. You know, under the concept of embodiment, we realize that artists embody a lot of artistic work, artistic experience, artistic knowledge, artistic values, and artistic virtues. So when these artists migrate, they carry all of these things to wherever they go. So I have worked with African migrant communities in Europe and North America for the past 19 years. And this is my experience I want to bring here for our attention. In Europe alone, I've been to Britain, Norway, France, Hungary, and Iceland. And in North America, I've been to a number of schools and institutions in the US and Canada. Now, the focus of all these experiences have been using the music as a vehicle to connect refugees to their native cultural values. In fact, it goes beyond that. But in Britain, for instance, basically that is where my practice was confined. And I can tell you that it worked. It worked well and provided a platform for the government to think about incorporating that into the documents that are normally designed for integration purposes. Now, my experience in Britain actually sees children from primary school. From primary school, anybody could actually participate in my music or drum music workshops. And then I worked initially in primary schools teaching drum music and dance. And then I moved to high schools, to colleges, and then universities. Another thing that is worth talking about is how these workshops are funded. My work started under the Labour government led by Tony Blair. And at some point, Tony Blair introduced what is called quality culture. And under the quality culture program, the Labour government was able to empower local communities with some funding so they could hire artists to have experience with the children in primary school, in high schools as well. And the quality culture program actually meant that every week these learners must have experience of some form of cultural activity, including music, dance, creative writing, storytelling, and dramatic enactment. So under this program, I was able to move up into so many schools, and with enthusiastic responses from the clients that I have actually worked with. Then when the Labour government lost power, the Conservatives came, led by David Cameron, and they introduced what we know as neoliberalism, which is not new. It actually worked before under Margaret Thatcher. And when the Labour government, when the Conservative government reintroduced the neoliberalism policy, it actually meant that the local communities, local schools, local councils are now going to be on their own. These economic and political systems are implemented for the purpose of giving power to the local communities. But you see, it also means that when they give you the power, you must also have responsibility. What is the responsibility? The responsibility is to fund yourself. You have the power to govern yourself, but you have to fund yourself too. And, you know, since the neoliberalism does not really allow central government to fund the activities that we were doing in those local schools, that gave us a tough time because many of the schools could not raise money locally to hire artists to do this. And this has made it impossible for many people to move on. So I moved to high schools and universities that were able to sort of raise money and to be able to pay for this. And then when I moved to Norway, precisely Norwegian University of Science and Technology, I moved with my artistic values, and all the students I met over there also had the experience of African music and dance. Now, in Norway, there was a program called Ipedam, which was just an intensive program organized for young and emerging ethno-choreologists. These are people who work on traditional music and dance of Europe and the rest of the world. And then my practice there focused on contribution of African music and dance expertise to the program. So I made sure that after the theoretical explorations, I gathered the students to go through the practical aspect of what we have discussed. So we did that, and students from different countries also took that to their various places. And then we also had another experience in France where there was a conference and I was supposed to speak on how to decolonize the curriculum for teaching African music and dance. Of course, even here in the diaspora, when we talk about African studies or Africana studies, mostly the people who control it are not Africans. And these are some of the issues that are very problematic because according to John Murungi, who is an anthropologist, African anthropologist from Uganda, the problem of Africa is felt by the Africans, is felt on the continent and even in the diaspora, but is felt significantly by the Africans and not non-Africans. And therefore, if there's any intervention to share or to curtail that program, it must be led by the Africans who know what they are feeling, etc. So the decolonization had to do with the various universities or higher education systems, both on the continent and in the diaspora that focus on African studies or Africana studies. And then we did that, and also there were performances that I led and workshops to introduce this idea of including it in integration, so that when people travel from their native soil to these areas, they can still get reunited. Then I also moved to Hungary, also in Europe. I was in University of Szeged, in Szeged. So I worked with Hungarian scholars, including Professor Laszlo Felföldi, Dr. Varga Sándor, and the rest. So my time in Hungary was very fruitful, as I shared music and dance practice and scholarly knowledge with the people over there, and also learned so much. The photo you see here, it's a group that actually includes both students in University of Szeged, as well as local community practitioners of music and dance. And I just had an African music and dance workshop with them. And here is an example of my experience in Iceland. In Iceland, I worked with a community full of Ghanaians, Nigerians, and a few other Africans. And this was coordinated by an organization called Afrozone. Afrozone is a Ghanaian company based in Iceland, which deals in African food, fabrics, artifacts, and cultural education related services. And so Afrozone actually facilitated my work in schools. We went to primary schools, high schools, and even the University of Iceland. And whilst I was in Iceland, the collective concern of the various institutions that I reached out to is the fact that the growing multiculturalism of the world needs to be emulated by Iceland, especially when people are coming from different places into Iceland. Iceland is a very small country with a population of about 500,000 people, but the country is becoming so diverse, and then they felt that the African aspect of it must also be highlighted. So we taught a number of schools and communities and had some public workshops that were profoundly successful. Now, this is also another workshop that I did in one of the SUNY schools, SUNY Geneseo, in upstate New York. And here is an event organized to celebrate African Day. And I was far away, but they had to invite me. So prestigious. I am so lucky to have been the one to be invited for this event. And I went to share my experience with them and gave them some kind of skills and a little bit of the importance of African music and dance as a tool for integrating African refugees and generally migrants into the diasporal communities. And then from there, I also had another one in Coastal Carolina University in South Carolina. And then also there were a few elementary schools in Myrtle Beach area of South Carolina, where I did basically drumming in a number of schools. These primary schools or these elementary schools are basically the segregated schools. And so you will see even the environment tells you that these schools are totally different from mainstream schools. So the segregated schools were selected for me to go in there and do the African drum music. And basically, for this particular one, it was not purposely on refugees per se, but it was part of Black History Month celebration, through which I highlighted, how slavery, colonization, and other things were documented in music, and then we were able to select some of those drum text or drum language that talks about those historical events, and then we actually celebrated it. In the end, there was a church called Hope Church in South Carolina. The church and the leaders also opened their doors for me to do that, which I did extremely well. And I also had some sessions in University of Dayton in Ohio, and a number of other schools that I could not include here. In Canada here, I've been to a number of schools. As you can see, Whitfield Laurier is the one I have chosen to stay here for my sabbatical, because of the fact that they are well established in terms of the African dimension of instrumentation. I came and I saw drums, I saw the Agbaja set, the Balogo set, the djembes, a whole lot of things, and I'm like, oh, this is African, this is home. And so I chose Laurier out of the many. I've also been to University of Alberta, which is in Edmonton. I've been to University of Toronto, Scarborough campus, and also University of British Columbia in Vancouver, then also Capilano University and also Simon Fraser University, all in Vancouver. Now, the only difference is that in Vancouver, we're looking at the music component of their programs and how African music through the drumming could also stand as a form to enrich their curriculum. But I managed to get into a local elementary school where my message for integration using the drum music was also preached over there, and it was embraced by all there. Now, you see, there should be a reason for me to push this, and there should be a reason for anybody to be concerned about the current style of integration. So when you look at migration and cultural alienation, it is clear that when natural calamity takes people out of Africa, that calamity must not take Africanness away from them. And you know that integration programs must consider inclusion of cultural forms like music as part of the process, just as I've articulated in the beginning, because the only thing that will make the Africans not lose the Africa in them is when we keep their cultural values that define them as Africans, wherever they are. So the integration process must involve everyone in that multicultural space in order to achieve community cohesion and peaceful coexistence. Because I am not highlighting this to say that the Africans are better than other people. I'm highlighting it because of what they might be losing, because what defines them is part of them and that's their life. So I am saying that even as we highlight this, we make it open. And so the integration process does not become something very unique to only the Africans. It should be open to everybody, including those who are in the mainstream, to also learn something from what the visitors are bringing. And so that mode is what I'm actually proposing. But you see, when we do all of these things, there is the question or the issue of representation. And that is very important. How do we represent Africa? In the beginning of my lecture, I made it clear that for you to stand and say African music is a delusion. Why? Because African music is not a single genre. And Africa is not even a country, it's the whole continent with many countries. In these countries too, there are many ethnic groups. So it is important that we actually talk about specific groups. That's the only way we can move closer to anything accurate. And so there's the need to also talk about originality, authentication, and then also generalization. Generalization is what we normally do here in the diaspora, but it's important that we talk about authentication as well, because yes, we can share that commonality that cuts across, but how authentic it is, because you will see djembes now being constructed using some plastic kind of material rather than the goat skin and a tree, you know. So in many African local settings, music is deeply embedded in the centrality of daily life. It is not merely an art form, but a lived experience, you know, which is inseparable from the cultural, social, and spiritual practices of the people. It's like an everyday activity that you cannot fail to be part of. But when it leaves that particular setting, it becomes a representation of the people and not the real thing. Now, if it becomes a representation of the people, then there is a process there involved which actually gives power to the one who is representing them to paint a particular picture of the people with the art form. So it's important that we deal with the complex issues that involve in representation. Now, as Stuart Hall articulated, you know, Hall looks at it as a signifying practice with diversity of meanings about any topic and more than one way of interpreting it or representing it. Stuart Hall is stressing that we have to be very careful how we represent people. We represent people through many forms. We represent people through clothing. We represent people through food. We represent them through music, through dance, through dramatic enactment, etc. But whichever means we use must actually get closer to the people. It has to do with using of authentic materials. And the articulations that we make must be clear. The people who represent it must also be seen as people who are competent about it. So these are the issues. Now, another scholar, Anthony Shea, is a dance scholar and practitioner who actually wrote about the national dance companies in Eastern Europe, and a book called Choreographic Politics. You see, Shea looks at representation as the power of describing others, and he emphasizes ethnography and collaboration. Now, collaboration here is the key word. Collaboration is what I propose, and we'll look at that in the end. I will explain it. Now, we look at the work of Kofi Agawu, who is very popular when it comes to African music. Is one of the figures that we respect in African music. Now, he sets out a framework that suggests ethical considerations, including assumption and prejudice in representing African music and dance. And I wanted us to have these three scholars at the back of our mind if you want to talk about how Africa is represented through the arts in the diaspora. I want us to also look at levels of representation. As I articulated earlier on, the notion of originality and authenticity is possible in the local setting. When I say local setting, I'm talking about whichever African local setting the people are coming from and their music and dance forms over there. To them, it is original and it is authentic because that is what they've lived with over time. Now, when that same art moves from the village or that native community to a national stage, then it becomes a representation that represents the various ethnic cultures. Here, the notion of originality and authenticity is questionable because When something moves, when something leaves its original space, moves to another space, it definitely changes. It experiences change. It also has some contemporary elements to deal with. So it can never be the same thing. Then in the diaspora, remember, in the diaspora, these art forms would have crossed the ocean, would have crossed so many borders to get to the diaspora. So in the diaspora, it represents a generalized continental culture of the Africans. I mean, we just say it without even thinking about it most of the time. We just say, oh, this is African music, this is African dance, this is African so and so. And, so it's really very problematic when we leave it at that level without getting to the various ethnic groups, various ethnic cultures and traditions. So here, originality and authenticity disappear. But what do? We just enjoy it as a source of entertainment alone. But as I articulated in the beginning, they are not primarily for entertainment, but also they are libraries, archives, repositories of knowledge, experiences, values, and virtues of the people. So wherever they are, they need it to be able to have their life complete. Now, this one question that is always asked is the fact that who qualifies to represent Africa? That question of who qualifies to represent Africa, it's a big question. And scholars here have talked about it, so many of them. And here. So you can talk about Agau 2003 and Doris Green 1998 and 2011 and John Murugi 2004. So these are the views of them. For Doris Green, it's blunt. It never ceases to amaze me that outsiders have the audacity to waltz into African studies. They take their terms and establish themselves as authoritative leaders. To establish archives of written African music and dance, Africans themselves must bear the lion's share of this undertaking, as they are the task force to capture the music from the villages, But you see, I differ a little bit. For me, my take is that arguably the task of representation is not limited to only insiders, especially when art forms are constantly in dialogue with one another in the current globalized technological world. So I propose a continuous collaboration, underline the word collaboration, which has to be continuous, with custodians in the native soil and practitioners in the diaspora as the way forward. That is what will solve the problem, because when we do collaboration, we are able to be in touch with the art forms wherever they are, and then we will be able to work together as a team of what? Both outsiders and insiders. Then I outlined the features of the collaboration that I am proposing. And it has to be continuous endeavor with the following dualistic realities. These are very important. So there should be African native scholars and their Western counterparts. There should also be practical and theoretical exploration of the art form. And there should be ontological and epistemological exploration of it. And it has to be a combination of local and global perspectives. And this is outlined in this book called Ambassadors of the Anglo-Ewe, written by Kwashie Kuwor. And I am very, very pleased to announce that Wilfrid Laurier University has a good example that can be leveraged on, because currently Wilfrid Laurier has a strong collaboration with institutions in Ghana, both the academy and the local institutions. And that makes it very easy for them to have access to what can be termed as authentic. And of course, I am part of that collaboration, so I can confidently come here and articulate it, and they can actually have their voices heard. So this is what I am proposing. In addition to that, there's an introduction of a new organization called African Organic Heritage, which seeks to eliminate three silent killers of Africa. And they are elitism, dogmatism, and religious fundamentalism. These are the real killers of African music and dance, because these three things consider African music and dance as evil, as paganism, as heathenism. So this organization is a universal fellowship that seeks to share knowledge, experiences, and inspire people to connect back to the creator of the known and the unknown universe. So its teachings are contained in a book called the Book of Knowledge. And the Book of Knowledge is already here, and copies are on Amazon that anybody can get to read. I have some excerpts from the Book of Knowledge. For example, if you look at chapters 11, verses 6 and 8, it says, spiritual awakening through music and dance is very central to the sustenance of life force in all humankind. Music and dance, as integral part of spiritual expression in many African traditions, must be used to invoke spiritual energies, to connect with ancestors, and to express emotions and experiences. Drumming, chanting, and rhythmic movements are to be employed as vessels that drive individuals and groups into a heightened spiritual state to foster communal bonding. There's another one, a short one here from chapter 4, verse 13. It says, through the great-grandmother's connection to the child, she becomes a vital link between the present and the ancestral past, carrying with her the collective wisdom of her lineage. This is all that African Organic Heritage is trying to do, to get this music connected to their origin and to their knowledge authorities, and to be able to share. Now, I would move on, because the Book of Knowledge says we should get connected to our grandparents. This is my maternal grandmother called Atsufi Goruga. And so I am drawing on her to do my conclusion. Mama Akbanu. Now, my grandma, who taught me a lot of knowledge before leaving this earth, also now becomes an enlightenment on my forehead wherever I go to do African music and dance. So I am going to do the conclusion in her name. So the conclusion is, yeah, African music is a powerful tool for cultural reconnection, reunion, and spiritual healing, especially for diasporan communities and particularly for refugees. However, their representation must be handled with care, ensuring that the cultural specificity and diversity of African traditions are respected and preserved. On that note, I am acknowledging Tshepo Institute, Wifoloria University, University of Ghana, students, faculty, and staff of Wifoloria University, and all those who have joined us online, those who are also here watching us. And I want to thank Karen, who has been the stronger pillar to put these things together for us, and her leadership of the Tshepo Institute at the moment. Thank you all.